I received a request about a week ago, around Valentine's Day, unfortunately, of someone asking me to do a video about heartbreak. And this is something which obviously is not the usual topic we discuss here. Not anything I claim to be any sort of expert on, but at the very least as a grown man now in his 30s, happily married, been through a number of relationships, including plenty of heartbreak. It's something we can at least comment on, talk a little bit about, and so let's try to see what we can do to help out that request. One of the things that I think is important to remember about various kinds of heartbreak is that it's often not about you necessarily. Now, there's almost always some takeaway we can come away from it with, in terms of, well, we could learn to communicate better, we can learn to better ourselves in how we navigate social complexities and conflict, we can learn to better ourselves in various ways, and it's worthwhile to take those takeaways away, but quite often, it's not like you're going to improve yourself after heartbreak and then win that person back, right? That's some movie garbage. That's not how human beings and relationships typically work. What's usually happening is it's a matter of fit, right? You're an apple, they're looking for an orange, and that there's a lot of different kinds of people in the world in terms of what they want out of relationships, in terms of what they are looking for in another person, and that to a great extent, same sort of thing if somebody gets laid off from a company. It doesn't mean that that person's defective, awful, flawed severely. Now, again, there's almost always some way we can take away from it, ways to improve ourselves, to increase our odds that the next thing might be more successful. But it's not like there's just some linear scale of how good you are, and that when you get pushed away from something, rejected, whether it's, for that matter, a relationship, a work opportunity, an application somewhere, whatever, it doesn't mean there's something hugely wrong with you. It means, okay, well, maybe keep searching, right? And a couple things to also keep in mind about relationship stuff is that it is nearly universal, in terms of it's something that is so core to the human experience that it's something everyone's going through. Sometimes, because it's something people don't talk a lot about, it's part of why I'm trying to talk about it today, we get this sense that we're alone in feeling rejected, that we're alone in our loneliness, that we're alone in feeling hurt in that way, because the portrayals we see from movies and TV shows and music and otherwise tend to be success stories, even if it's the end result of some drama, but a success story because that's what we want to pay to see. That's entertaining. It's a positive message. It can have this disproportionate effect on us of feeling like, therefore, we're unusual and that it didn't work out. It is far more common it doesn't work out than it does. And I think even while strategic, rational logic doesn't always necessarily help in these kind of cases, whenever I would be in a situation of heartbreak, I would try to remind myself that there was basically one of two ways that this relationship could end. Maybe two and a half, as we'll talk about in a second. One is like one person or the other dies, which you don't want that to happen. That's certainly not a positive outcome. Or you get broken up at some point, right? I mean, that's quite literally the main options. People who stay together until one of them dies, or they break up. And I think when phrased in that way, we can maybe hopefully get some sort of at least temporary distance to the idea that maybe between the two, breaking up might have been for the better, if only because it might lead both people to better find someone who's a better fit for them. I don't think in the long run it does anyone any favors to force something to work that was requiring too much effort, too much stress, too much going out of their way to change who they were, how they presented themselves to make it work. Far better to find someone who's better fit. And that's something that, the little bits of relationship advice I ever got from my parents. My mom would talk about how it's important that people be able to make things work, but that they not rely upon that as the foundation. That if on a normal day, in a normal relationship situation, day to day, it's something that requires a ton of effort and stress and just work to make it function, then when a real challenge arises from outside of that relationship, from outside of other factors in their life, school, work, other personality situations, whatever, then they're not going to have the extra give that they need to be able to really put in the effort to make that work. So the foundation should hopefully be a little more of a natural fit. In terms of that natural fit, that's something which I think experience helps make us better at. I think that as much as it always hurts, no matter which person is sort of responsible for breaking a union, etc., it's something which a lot of what helps someone fare better in relationships as they age is partly their former relationships. And it's not like there's just kind of no shortcut to having gotten through some things, having learned about ourselves in those circumstances, having learned from the feedback of people that we've been with, and then being able to use that to reflect on how we carry ourselves, which communication skills we work on, how we troubleshoot difficult things that arise, and so on. And speaking of which, another thing that comes out of these sometimes is this realization that there's an unrealistic expectation that when people are in a relationship, everything's just going to work and the whole world's going to be rosy and then life is solved. And I think, again, this is kind of contributed to by TV shows and movies and whatever, doing us the disservice, novels just as guilty, of kind of portraying this sort of and then happily ever after vibe that like the hard part was getting into the relationship and everything's just easy. I think my, again, kind of advice from my parents were like my dad's perspective was a reminder that people who are single have all kinds of complications and problems in their life, and that when they're married, they don't suddenly, those things don't go away, right? Like they still have problems in life, and in some ways they kind of have twice as many, because suddenly problems in the life of their partner are their problem to be concerned about too, in terms of going to affect them. And sometimes people get this broken perspective that they blame the person that they're with, they blame the relationship that they're in, when it may well be outside stressors that would frankly be there, or just as relevant to them if they weren't in a relationship. And so I think that's another bit where sometimes, again, some distance from it can help us remind ourselves a bit about how we deal with the struggles that we go through. I don't think I can't really offer any sort of broad-ranging generic advice as to what helps someone recover from it any more speedily or any more fully, except kind of looking forward, except maybe trying to figure out how do I get myself back on track so that I can find someone who's going to be a better fit. And I'm actually reminded of, I was in a relationship, this would have been, heck, I was probably 19, 20 years old at the time. And man, this relationship, it was just not great. And again, like, and let me be clear, this person wasn't a problem. This person was a perfectly fine human being, intelligent, capable, compassionate, reasonable person. Just wasn't a good fit. Various incompatibilities in there. And a great friend of mine from high school would kind of explain to me, and sort of talking through what I was and wasn't experiencing there, this realization that, like, as long as that really, really incorrect fit was kind of being forced by both of us to kind of make it work, it was preventing either of us from finding someone who would be a better fit, right? It was filling in that spot in our lives, preventing us from doing the search. Now, the search would be uncomfortable, right? The search involves phases of loneliness and self-doubt and these other struggles, which, as I talked about yesterday, is maybe a part of how we reflect on improving ourselves and growing and learning. But as much as it wasn't the easy thing to do, it was going to happen eventually. I kind of saw that much writing on the wall. And in the scheme of things, all considered, then the sooner that sort of result happened, the better, right? Because either way, it was going to have felt like not time misspent, but time that in the long run I might have wished I had spent searching for another partner, another pair, another relationship to be in. But instead, it could have taken another 6, 8, 12, 24 months of my life or something with it, rather than, let it be for the time that it was. We're trying to talk about heartbreak, because that was a question, but a lot of these exact same patterns will relate potentially to someone who has no longer a relationship to an employer, right? Whether that's a severed connection, whether they quit, whether they're fired, or whatever, is to realize that it's entirely possible, and I think healthy for us, to see a past relationship as perfectly valid and time well spent for the time that it took place, without having to conflate that with the idea that therefore it should still be the case today. That there are plenty of relationships I had in my life where, for the time that the relationship was active, was going on in our lives, it was time well spent. It was enriching for us. It was stabilizing for us. It was comforting for us, and it was a positive thing for both of us in our development and our growth and our experiences in the world. But afterward, it had crossed some sort of point where it was no longer in the best benefit of both of us in our lives And again, so then to simultaneously not feel the need to disrespect that past time, or to not feel like it was something wrong with that person, or is, and instead see like that was valuable time, that was worthwhile, that was right for the time that it was in. And as much as, when you were in maybe a bit of a stretch, but like when you're in middle school is the right thing to be doing. And when you're not in middle school, we'll stop doing middle school stuff, right? There's a phase of our lives where that can be helpful for us. And everybody's always struggling to sort it out. It's tough. How we find our way in and out of those things. And it's messy in terms of it hurts, again, no matter how, no other way to slice that. Let's see if there's any other kind of bits we might share about heartbreak. There's an old illustration I like that shows this difference between how people think success happens and how success actually happens. And how people think it happens is that there's like a fork in the road and success is one way and failure is the other. And how it really happens, right, is that it's like failure, 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 success. And it's through bouncing through those failed attempts that get someone to the point where they have that experience to draw upon to fare better in a relationship. And while it is, again, not to cast those past relationships as failure in that same way, it is absolutely something where every time I've experienced heartbreak, it's in the long run, I think helped me become a better husband. I think helped me become better in relationships, in part from the reflection that invites on what can we learn from this? How can we further improve ourselves? How can we become more confident and comfortable with who we are? And how to fare those things more naturally. And again, it's something which literally everyone around you, your parents, every friend you've ever known, every child on earth is going to go through at some point in their lives, for probably a majority of their lives, this sort of experience of heartbreak. Super not alone in it, super not unusual, doesn't make it hurt any less. But hang in there. I think it's part of our development. It's part of how we learn stuff. It's part of our growth. Nothing unnatural or awful about it. And this includes, I know a lot of this has actually been about the case of heartbreak in the sense of in a relationship and then fell apart and it ceased to be. But obviously there's many other kinds of heartbreak, whether it is from a relationship which never even starts, from someone that we feel attracted to and it's not a mutual feeling, or in the case of, obviously there's other kinds of heartbreak of if someone in our life passes away, if we have our hopes and wishes set on something and then come to terms with that something might not happen for us, or at least not in the foreseeable future, etc. But I think a lot of these things actually still apply in terms of using as opportunities to realize doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that person or with us necessarily, but that we can still sometimes use that as a lens to help steer ourselves into better who we want to become, into realizing that it's a growth opportunity if we don't just let it slide by ignoring it. That we're going to go through the discomfort anyway. May as well try to see if we can tap into that a little bit to help us push ourselves to develop ourselves, improve ourselves. And I say this partly as someone who, whenever I've had emotional difficulties in my life, I've kind of been the sort of person to bury myself in practicing of one kind or another, practicing game development, practicing programming, practicing art, practicing whatever, as a way to kind of distract myself from that and to make sure I'd feel like I was coming out of it, being that emotional experience, coming out of it stronger than I went into it. At least in a way I felt had some supportive evidence for I'm moving myself forward, I'm investing my time into myself, because I think often what happens, right, is the real damage that happens is it can be a hit to our confidence, it can be a hit to our sense of who we are, a sense to our self-worth, and that's why I try to distract myself from it, maybe reinvest those energies into how can I build that back up so I can kind of give myself a solid case to justify that, I'm investing this energy in myself, I'm improving the kind of person that I am building up how able I am to help people, how able I am to communicate, and so on. And I find that for me that's been a helpful coping mechanism because it helps offset some of those pings that necessarily happen to our sense of self or self-worth. And like I say, this is just obviously it's not really my field in terms of not something I advise or coach people on aside from maybe just talking through friends who they have their own tumult that they're going through, and then reflecting, of course, on my own years in and out of experiences. And maybe the one last, I know I've probably said this multiple times, one last note on it is that it's something where the odds may seem against your favor, where it may feel difficult, where it may seem like it's a stretch that you're going to find the kind of person who really jives with you and, you know, is a fit for how you communicate and how you troubleshoot and how you navigate life and so on. But the way that works is that ideally, right, if you get it really right, if you keep searching until you find where it's the right fit, it's the right match, it's something where both of you bring past experiences into it in a way that's compatible and sufficient to kind of build as a foundation, it kind of only has to work out once really, really well. And for a lot of folks, that may be the remainder of their lives, right? It's sort of like with a job search. It's like the odds of any given single particular job are low. But if they find a job and a career at a company they're really happy with, in some cases, people can build an entire lifetime out of that. Not always how it works, at least not, especially not in the job case. But relationships, of course, that's often the end goal, isn't to find dozens of people or hundreds of people who this is the case for. It's, can you make it work once? And hopefully with that perspective, it's something where all the times that it doesn't can be maybe this Thomas Edison kind of reminder of, you know, I have not failed 10,000 times. I've found 10,000 ways that didn't work. Each time that you are in a relationship that doesn't quite pan out the way you wish it did, you know, you've give yourself some credit because you're still putting yourself out there, you're still exploring, you're still trying, you're still experimenting, you're still learning, you're still improving at it. The worst thing to do is kind of shut yourself off from that and deny others the opportunity to grow through, you know, getting to know you as well. That's all for the day. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll have another video for you tomorrow.